Welcome to the Career Ground Show. I'm your host, Dr. G, with a PhD. Hope everybody had a fantastic weekend. Now we've got quite a bit of news for you guys. So first, we're going to start off with those two letters that I thought we were going to get to last week, but we ran out of time. From there, we're going to go to Fauci on lockdowns and what he has to say about the future of lockdowns, especially with this Omicron variant. We'll talk a little bit about transmissibility, and I've got a paper out of Texas, and it's got some pretty interesting stats. From there, we're going to go to Omicron and multiplication. So how much is Omicron multiplying compared to Delta? After that, we'll talk on this video discussing superimmunity, which is a new term, a fun term, and we'll see if it's actually relevant at all to the discussion, especially in terms of Omicron. From that particular discussion on superimmunity, we'll look at the actual first results we have of Omicron in Denmark, which has a pretty robust public health system, so it's got some pretty good data. And finally, we'll take a look at all the lockdowns happening all over the world in response to this new Omicron outbreak. So let's get at it. So the first letter we're going to look at is a letter to the Lancet, and the title of that letter is "The Epidemiological Relevance of the COVID-19 Vaccinated Population is Increasing," and this is by Günter Kampf. Now this is a pretty short paper or a letter, so I recommend everyone go read it if they want, and now we're going to break down parts of it. So for the first part, let's look at what he has to say about COVID-19 vaccination rates in the UK. So in the UK, it was described that secondary attack rates among household contacts exposed to fully vaccinated indexed cases was similar to household contacts exposed to unvaccinated indexed cases. This was 25% for vaccinated versus 23% for unvaccinated. 12 of 31 infections in fully vaccinated household contacts, which is 39%, arose from fully vaccinated epidemiologically linked index cases. And for anybody wondering, when you're talking about epidemiology, an index case is basically the origin case, or a case of origin for a disease outbreak in an area. Dr. Kampf then goes on to describe that peak viral load did not differ by vaccination status or variant type, and we'll look at more about this in this transmission study later on in the program. In Germany, the rate of symptomatic COVID-19 cases among fully vaccinated, so breakthrough infections, is reported weekly since the 21st of July in 2021 and was 16.9% at the time among patients of 60 years of age or older. This proportion is increasing week by week and was at 58.9% on the 27th of October 2021. He also notes a similar situation was described for the UK between weeks 39 and 42. A total of 100,160 COVID-19 cases were reported among citizens of 60 years or older. 89,821 occurred among the fully vaccinated, making that 89.7% of the cases, and 3,395 among the unvaccinated, making that 3.4% of the cases. In Israel, a nosocomial outbreak was reported involving 16 healthcare workers, 23 exposed patients, and 2 family members. The source was a fully vaccinated COVID-19 patient. The vaccination rate was 96.2% among all exposed individuals, 151 healthcare workers, and 97 patients. 14 fully vaccinated patients became severely ill or died. The 2 unvaccinated patients developed mild disease. And by the way, nosocomial refers to when the disease or the origin of the disease in that little outbreak comes from a hospital. And finally, he refers to the CDC, which is our CDC in the US, and that's the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And they identify 4 of the top 5 counties with the highest percentage of fully vaccinated populations, 99.9 to 84.3%, as, quote, high, unquote, transmission counties. Many decision makers assume that the vaccinated can be excluded as a source of transmission. It appears to be grossly negligent to ignore the vaccinated population as a possible and relevant source of transmission when deciding about public health control measures. And here's a figure from the letter, and this figure refers to the description of Germany from July 21st of 2021 until October 27th of 2021. And what it shows is the vaccination rate in Germany, and that's a dark black line, and then the proportion of fully vaccinated people among symptomatic COVID-19 cases that are greater than or equal to 60 years of age, and you can see that number climbing. There's lots of healthy questioning that can be asked from graphs like this and letters like this. Could these rising numbers be the case that the vaccination effectiveness waned in that short of a time? Remember, for most of these countries to be considered fully vaccinated, unless it's the Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca version, it's a double dose of Moderna or Pfizer. And so if it's a double dose and it's already waning that fast, that has a lot of implications. We looked at a Swedish study a while back that showed this. That could be what they're talking about. It could be the case that these viruses, like viruses tend to do, especially coronaviruses, mutate pretty quickly. And as we discussed a few weeks ago, which is why we predicted Omicron might be infecting many more vaccinated people than previous versions, is because mutations, especially in the spike protein, might be able to pretty easily get around the protection provided by the vaccination, which is specifically geared towards creating a response to the spike proteins. It's also fair to ask whether or not boosters are the right solution. They might be, but they might not be, and it's fair to look at both sides, which I don't think is what's actually happening right now. The letter also mentioned that, a lot of older people are getting really impacted by this. Again, we've noted this for a long time, but that has a lot of implications on what parents do with their children in terms of vaccination, and these should really be looked at. As a matter of fact, this next letter from JAMA looks specifically at that and trust in the medical community. The letter is written by Dr. Catherine Sarkisian, and it's in response to the article, Why Parents Still Hesitate to Vaccinate Their Children Against COVID-19. You can find the article and her response in the description, and I'd love if you guys would read it and, see which side you fall on. It's important to have these debates, and it's important to flesh them out in the best way possible. But let's get to her response. Being as short as it is, I'm just going to read the whole thing, and it starts by saying, this article fails to mention a major reason many smart, caring parents are waiting for more data before allowing their children to receive vaccines for a disease with close to zero chance of mortality. That's in the children. Parents have lost trust in our medical establishment and its unethical relationship with the pharmaceutical industry. Instead of relying heavily on opinion quotes from a pharmaceutical industry employee, JAMA should have published an article with this title that presented actual data about what parents believe. There is nothing paradoxical about parents who are vaccinated themselves wanting to wait for more/longer term data from fully powered RCTs before having their kids receive a new emergency use authorization vaccine. On the contrary, it makes great sense given the extremely low risk of harm from COVID-19 for a 5 to 11-year-old. As a physician scientist and a left-leaning human being who believes in the social contract and never lets my kids miss a vaccine, I am extremely frustrated seeing such a biased article published in JAMA. So a pretty scathing response here from Dr. Sarkisian. First of all, an RCT is a randomized clinical trial. We've discussed those before, but that's an acronym that sometimes is easily forgotten. Then she mentions, why might it be a good idea to wait for long-term data? Now, a lot of people have said, well, there's been no vaccine that people get regularly now that has any long-term side effects. So it's important to note that long-term side effects take a long time to figure out. So, for example, in this article, why does it take so long to develop a vaccine? Barney Graham goes on to say that I've never seen one take less than 20 years. It took 26 years to develop a vaccine for human papillomavirus and 25 years to secure one for rotavirus. And several vaccines follow this trend because you can't rush a lot of natural processes that would indicate how long-term plays out. Furthermore, the vaccines that we're taking now that are in regular usage, like chickenpox, for example, or measles or rubella, so those vaccines had a bunch of competition for other vaccines to fight the same thing. And Graham points out that the number of vaccines that don't make it or fail during clinical trials in early stages is 90%. So the ones that you are getting right now are the cream of the crop, but that doesn't mean that all vaccines fall into that. And the thing with the coronavirus vaccine that's out right now is it hasn't gone by the traditional playbook. So we don't know, and anyone says that we do know it's safe long-term, they're lying to you because no one knows what the long-term is right now. This is not to say don't get the vaccine. I think that this just adds into the risk assessment. And this is very much in line with what Dr. Sarkisian is saying, is that it's a prudential choice for parents to say, hey, I want to hold on. I want to wait for some more data before I vaccinate my kid with this thing, especially because it's not really impacting children at that age group. If you're, in your 70s and you're obese and, asthmatic, well, the risk is different. The risk assessment is different, and you might want to get boosted. It's all nuanced and it all matters. And these two letters did a great job last month and this month of discussing why we need this kind of discussion. Now, moving on from these letters, let's see what Dr. Fauci has to say about lockdowns in light of the Omicron variant.
So with that and with what you've described as the way to be prudent, the success of vaccines and boosters, we're not headed towards anything approaching the kind of lockdown we saw last year, are we?
I don't see that in the future if we do the things that we're talking about. John, the thing that continues to be very troublesome to me and my public health colleagues are the fact that we still have about 50 million people in the country who are eligible to be vaccinated, who are not vaccinated. When you have that degree of vulnerability and you have a virus like Omicron that spreads so rapidly, it is quite likely that...
So at least he's saying one good thing. We're not going to see those lockdowns like we did in March of 2020. That's good. What he's also saying is that, all right, look, there's 50 million people. They're not vaccinated. What's the problem there? Well, the problem he's laying out is that it might be the case that, like in other variants of the COVID-19 virus, such as Delta, patients that were unvaccinated in particular groups saw much more significant disease than patients that were vaccinated. So he's saying, look, we might see more significant disease in the unvaccinated this go around, and that might exhaust the healthcare system. Now, in a little bit, we'll address the latest that we have on Omicron from around the world, and we'll see what that prediction, how close that prediction is to being truth or not. Now, one thing that was totally omitted in the response was, if you're vaccinated, are you transmitting COVID? Are you a source of transmission? If that happens to be the case, then a bunch of these hospitals that are firing workers for not being vaccinated and the reason is that they have a more likely chance of passing COVID on to patients, that's bunk. And so let's look into a study that discusses transmission between Delta in vaccinated and unvaccinated in a prison population in Texas. So the title of this study is Transmission Potential of Vaccinated and Unvaccinated Persons Infected with SARS-CoV-2 Delta Variant in a Federal Prison, July through August of 2021. This version was posted a little over a month ago, a month and a day now, on November 19th. Now, like everything else, the link to the paper is in the description so you guys can read the full thing. I'm only going to highlight a couple of things. So real quick, here's how the abstract looks. And if we can focus in on the conclusion, it says this: as this field continues to develop, clinicians and public health practitioners should consider vaccinated persons who become infected with SARS-CoV-2 to be no less infectious than unvaccinated persons. These findings are critically important, especially in congregate settings where viral transmission can lead to large outbreaks. Now remember, this is with Delta. So up front, the paper notes that in a recent outbreak involving the Delta variant in a federal prison in Texas, the cumulative incidence of infection in 2 affected housing units was 74%. It was 93% and 70% among unvaccinated and vaccinated incarcerated persons, respectively. So that just lays the setting for how prevalent COVID was in this prison and the housing systems. But let's go straight to the discussion. Opening sentence. During a high transmission outbreak of the SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant in a prison setting, we failed to find different durations of RT-PCR positivity, CT values, or duration of viral cultural positivity in fully vaccinated persons compared with persons who were not fully vaccinated. Now I'll overlay on the screen here just some of the findings, the graphs at least in the paper, just so you guys can see how they look. Again, everyone should go read it if they're interested. What's also important to note is that it's a small study, so it had about 100 people, a little over 100. But we can repeat these, and that's what we should be doing. It's also interesting to note that 19 of the 29 authors are from the CDC COVID-19 response team. Now, there is a disclaimer saying that the findings and conclusions in this report are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official position of the CDC, but I really didn't hear anything about this paper when it was put into this publication on November 19th. I don't know about you guys, but this is kind of a big deal, and I think it'd be really good for discussion. It was nowhere. I actually just for the first time heard about it this past weekend. Of course, I'm not the arbiter of when things are well disseminated or not, and I'd be curious to know if you guys have heard about this paper. You can make a comment in the comments, but I'm just saying I don't think it was that prevalent or it wasn't talked about that much. Now, speaking of transmissibility and what does and doesn't help, this probably does help in terms of transmissibility for Omicron. This is coming out of USA. The Omicron variant multiplies 70 times faster in the human bronchial tubes than the initial COVID-19 infection or the Delta variant, according to a new study from the University of Hong Kong. So what does that mean, basically? We're all going to get it. The good news is, it seems to be not that bad. But before we get to that good news, let's hear in about superimmunity and what that means.
Breakthrough infections, we know they are on the rise. And there's a study by Oregon researchers which finds that when people who are fully vaccinated catch COVID, they end up with what the authors are calling superimmunity. So if that's the case, is it still important to get boosted after an infection, even if you've gotten your single dose J&J or both doses of Pfizer or Moderna? You get COVID, do you get boosted as well?
And Alex, it is important to get boosted for a couple reasons. We know you get what they're calling that superimmunity now. We don't know how long that lasts. And so getting that booster shot, and what I always talk about is establishing a baseline with your immune system, a very high baseline with the 2 vaccines, if it's mRNA with the Johnson & Johnson, if you got that, and then the booster shot on top of it gives you that baseline. If you do get infected and get a breakthrough, it pushes that baseline up, but we don't know if that's going to come down or not because of that superinfection being part of a natural infection, which we know doesn't necessarily last as long. And so getting those booster shots is important. But if you do get breakthrough infections, what they're saying is you do seem to get, it's almost like getting another booster shot on top of that. Your immune system gets worked out even more and gets to be that much stronger. What we don't know is how long that strong immune system is going to last at that level.
So first of all, how many times can you say booster shot in a minute 15 seconds? Apparently a lot. But if you listen to what this guy is saying, this doctor, he's basically saying we don't know a lot, so get the booster. Why? Because we don't know a lot. I don't think it's a particularly convincing argument, and I think even just the word superimmunity is just adding this confusion into this milieu about COVID response. I don't think it's useful. I don't even know what it means. Also, why isn't regular immunity good enough? When the first set of vaccines came out, they gave you immunity. Why do we need superimmunity? Especially as we're just about to find out, Omicron seems to be the least bad version of all the COVID variants we've had so far. So this is a rapid communication paper coming out from Denmark, and the title is Epidemiological Characterization of the First 785 SARS-CoV-2 Omicron Variant Cases in Denmark, December 2021. So jumping right into it, reading from the characterization of cases. As per the 9th of December 2021, 785 cases of SARS-CoV-2 Omicron have been registered in Denmark. As there is a few days lag from sampling to test results, the latest sampling data was the 7th of December. Daily case counts rose quickly, with daily increases of more than 40% from the 4th of December. In total, 143, which is 18%, have so far been confirmed by WGS. The age of cases ranged from 2 to 95 years, median was 32 years of age, and 433, which is 55%, were male. 9 cases, 1.2%, have or are hospitalized. 1 case so far has received intensive care treatment, and no cases have died. Now, skipping ahead a couple of sentences, a total of 599, which is 76% of the cases, were fully vaccinated, and an additional 56, which is 7.1%, had received a full vaccination plus a booster. Number and proportions of cases with the SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant in the same period are also shown in Table 2. So here's a quick look at Table 2, and you guys can pause it here. Again, this is in the description, so you guys can go look at this rapid communication at your own leisure. And finally, here's a small take out of the discussion section of the article. It is of concern that 83% of cases occurred in fully or booster vaccinated people. Whether this observation is an artifact as the major super spreading events and subsequent chains of transmission have occurred primarily in young adults and not yet spread to children who have not been vaccinated is still too early to say. The data are too immature to allow analyzing the cases by vaccine type. However, it can be mentioned that 76% of the Danish population are fully vaccinated, and 84% of these have received Comirnaty, followed by 14% with the Spikevax. We mentioned this at the beginning, but again, with 10 mutations to the spike protein over the Delta variant, it was most likely going to be the case that people that were vaccinated with a spike protein vaccine were probably going to be susceptible to infection with so many changes in this new variant of its spike protein. But all in all, this is excellent news for the population so far. This variant, again, seems much more mild than other variants. And now for our last story, we're going to go to CNBC and see what they're doing about lockdowns around the world and how people are responding to them. This was published December 18th. Title of the article is Netherlands Orders Extreme Lockdown Until Mid-January to Rein in Spread of the Omicron Variant. Now here are some key points, and let's get into the article. Nations across Europe moved to reimpose tougher measures to stem a new wave of COVID-19 infections spurred by the highly transmissible Omicron variant, with the Netherlands leading the way by imposing a nationwide lockdown. All non-essential stores, bars, and restaurants in the Netherlands will be closed until January 14th, starting Sunday. Caretaker Prime Minister Mark Rutte said at a hastily arranged press conference Saturday night. Schools and universities will shut until January 9th, he said. Residents will only be permitted 2 visitors except for Christmas and New Year's when, get this, 4. A whole 4 will be allowed, according to Rutte. It wasn't just the Dutch seeking to slow the spread of Omicron. Alarmed ministers in France, Cyprus, and Austria tightened travel restrictions. Paris canceled its New Year's Eve fireworks. Denmark has closed theaters, concert halls, amusement parks, and museums. Ireland is imposing an 8 p.m. curfew on pubs and bars and limited attendance at indoor and outdoor events. On a quick side note, whenever they impose these curfews, what is that doing, you know? People are allowed to hang out and talk and get drunk until 8 p.m. and then the virus comes out at night to try and get you, so you can't be out after 8. It's kind of a weird rule, I always thought. The article goes on. Major questions about Omicron remained unanswered, including how effective existing COVID-19 vaccines are against it and whether the variant produces severe illness in many infected individuals, the WHO noted. And yet, Omicron's substantial growth advantage over the Delta variant means it is likely to soon overtake Delta as the dominant form of the virus in countries where the new variant is spreading locally, the UN Health Agency said. In the UK, where confirmed daily cases soared to record numbers this week, the government has reimposed a requirement for masks to be worn indoors and ordered people to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative coronavirus test when going to nightclubs and large events. The head of the Dutch Public Health Institute described the shutdowns as a preventative move that would, quote, buy time, end quote, for more people to get boosters vaccines and for the nation's healthcare system to prepare for a possible new surge in infections. Scientists are warning the British government it needs to go further to prevent hospitals from being overwhelmed. Leaked minutes from the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies suggested a ban on indoor mixing and hospitality, the BBC reported. Britain and other nations are also accelerating the pace of booster shots after early data showed that 2 doses of the vaccine were less effective against the Omicron variant. Shopping centers, cathedrals, and soccer stadiums in Britain have been converted into mass vaccination centers. Thousands of opponents of vaccine requirements and mask mandates protested Saturday in Hamburg, Berlin, and other German cities. In Austria, local media reported that the crowd swelled to tens of thousands. In light of the data, this is utter madness, and I really hope it comes to an end soon. Also, if you're in a city like New York, or if you're in California, or certain other states in the U.S., which tend to follow European trends, this is not looking good. And especially at New York, I really hope that the New Year's Eve party can go down without a hitch, but it's looking less and less likely the closer we get as Omicron starts spreading. And that's all we have for you guys today. I hope you have a great Monday. If you liked what you saw, please share with your friends. Please have them subscribe. I just started an Instagram account, so I can post all of my fun thumbnails on there. So if you guys have an Instagram, go follow that. Please enjoy this video, and I'll catch you guys again on Wednesday.
This hat is mine now.
Sorry, Tim. My sister just gave me that hat.
Please, Mark.
Please, Mark, can I have my hat back? Please, Mark.
Can we give you back?